Do you remember the 2008 financial crisis, the catastrophic event that shook the world's economy? Let's journey back to that time when the world was caught in the throes of the Great Recession. It was a period marked by a profound human impact. Millions of jobs were lost as companies unable to weather the storm closed their doors. People from all walks of life found themselves standing in unemployment lines, their livelihoods swept away in the blink of an eye. But the fallout didn't stop there. The housing market crumbled, leading to an unprecedented number of foreclosures. Families were forced out of their homes, their dreams of a secure future shattered by a financial crisis they had little control over. The tremors of this crisis were not contained within the borders of one country. It was a global contagion spreading like wildfire across continents. Financial markets around the world, interconnected more than ever, felt the impact. From Tokyo to London, stock markets plunged, wiping out billions in wealth. The crisis also laid bare the structural weaknesses of several economies. Take Europe, for instance. A continent known for its robust economies and high living standards was hit hard. The European debt crisis was a harsh reality check. Countries like Greece and Portugal, their economies teetering on the brink, found themselves in the spotlight. The crisis revealed deep-seated issues within their economic structures, leading to financial turmoil and widespread protests. The fallout was vast, affecting every corner of the globe. It was a stark reminder of our collective vulnerability, a wake-up call that exposed the frailties of even the most advanced economies. The 2008 financial crisis was not just a recession, it was a global crisis, a fallout that sent shockwaves throughout the world, leaving no corner untouched. The fallout from the 2008 financial crisis was vast, affecting every corner of the globe and exposing the vulnerabilities of even the most advanced economies. After the fallout, the world was in desperate need of a solution. The government had to step in. But how? In the midst of the 2008 financial crisis, the US government implemented several measures to prevent the total collapse of the economy. One of these was the Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP. In essence, TARP was a series of bailouts in which the government purchased assets and equity from financial institutions. This was a controversial move, with many arguing that it simply rewarded the reckless behavior of the banks that had caused the crisis in the first place. Others, however, contended that it was a necessary evil to avoid an even more catastrophic economic downturn. In the wake of TARP, another key piece of legislation was passed, the Dodd-Frank Act. This sweeping financial reform aimed to reduce the risks in the US financial system by increasing regulation and oversight, as well as ending the concept of too big to fail. The act brought significant changes to financial regulation, affecting all federal financial regulatory agencies and almost every part of the nation's financial services industry. Key provisions of the Dodd-Frank Act included the creation of the Financial Stability Oversight Council, tasked with identifying risks to the financial stability of the United States, the Volcker Rule, which restricts banks from making certain kinds of speculative investments, and the establishment of the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection, designed to protect consumers from abusive financial services practices. Of course, government intervention wasn't limited to bailouts and regulatory reform. The Federal Reserve, the Central Bank of the United States, also had a significant role to play. In response to the crisis, the Fed slashed interest rates to near zero to try to stimulate the economy and prevent deflation. But with traditional monetary policy tools largely exhausted, it also turned to something called quantitative easing. Quantitative easing is a somewhat complex concept, but in simplified terms, it involves a central bank buying securities from the market in order to increase the money supply and encourage lending and investment. By doing this, the Fed was able to inject a large amount of money into the economy, which helped to stabilize the financial system. So, in the face of one of the greatest financial crises in history, the government responded with a combination of bailouts, regulatory reform, and monetary policy measures. These actions undoubtedly helped to prevent a complete economic meltdown and set the stage for recovery. This was a time of unprecedented government intervention and regulatory reform, but were these measures enough to prevent a future crisis? As we reflect on the events of 2008 and their aftermath, this question remains central to our understanding of the modern financial world. It's a question that continues to shape economic policy and debate today, and it's a question that ultimately only time will answer. The aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis is still felt today, casting a long shadow over our economy. One of the most poignant signs of this long shadow is the issue of income inequality. Before the crisis, the gap between the rich and the poor was already widening, but the events of 2008 accelerated this trend. The rich, especially those in finance, recovered quickly, while middle and working class families struggled. The wealth of the top 1% grew exponentially, while the bottom 99% saw their wealth stagnate or even decline. This imbalance has created a palpable tension, a sense of injustice that has yet to be fully addressed. Let's pivot to the housing market, another area where the aftermath of the crisis is glaringly apparent. Prior to the crisis, home ownership was a symbol of the American dream. But in the wake of the financial collapse, that dream became a nightmare for many. The crisis led to a surge in foreclosures, with millions losing their homes. Even today, over a decade later, the housing market has not fully recovered. Affordability remains a significant issue, with many families priced out of home ownership. The scars of the crisis run deep, and the dream of owning a home remains elusive for many. The crisis also led to a rise in populism, both in the United States and abroad. There was a palpable sense of betrayal, a feeling that the government and financial elites had failed the people. This fueled distrust and resentment, leading to a surge in populist movements and leaders promising to take on the establishment. The crisis had exposed the flaws and vulnerabilities in our system, and people were hungry for change. This wave of populism has fundamentally altered the political landscape, and its effects are still being felt today. Finally, we must address the global economic shifts that were triggered by the crisis. The financial meltdown did not just impact the United States. It sent shockwaves around the world, but in its aftermath there was a shift in economic power. Emerging economies, particularly in Asia, began to gain ground. As Western economies struggled to recover, countries like China and India experienced significant growth. The crisis accelerated the shift towards a more multipolar world, altering the global balance of power. The crisis left an indelible mark on our society and economy, the effects of which are still unfolding. The shadow of the 2008 financial crisis is long, and its impacts are still being felt. It has shaped our world in profound ways, from exacerbating income inequality to transforming the housing market, fueling the rise of populism and shifting global economic power. As we continue to grapple with its aftermath, it serves as a stark reminder of the importance of financial stability and the devastating consequences when it is lost. Have we learned our lesson from the 2008 financial crisis? And more importantly, what are we doing to prevent the next one? This question echoes in the minds of economists, politicians, and citizens alike. The debates on reforms are as diverse as the voices that contribute to them. Some argue that the measures taken have been effective, pointing to the relative stability of global financial markets since the Great Recession. They highlight the importance of the Dodd-Frank Act in the United States and similar reforms in other countries. These legislations, they argue, have introduced much-needed oversight, increased transparency, and reduced the risk of a similar crisis. On the other hand, there are those who question the effectiveness of these reforms. They argue that the changes have primarily served to treat the symptoms of the crisis, rather than addressing its underlying causes. Some even suggest that the reforms have created new problems, such as inhibiting innovation and creating regulatory burdens that disproportionately affect smaller financial institutions. The debate also extends to potential risks that still exist in our financial system. One example is the so-called shadow banking sector, which operates outside the traditional banking system and remains largely unregulated. This sector, which includes activities such as peer-to-peer lending and money market funds, has grown significantly since the crisis and could potentially pose a risk to financial stability. Derivatives, financial contracts that derive their value from an underlying asset, also remain a concern. While they can be used to manage risk, they can also amplify it. The misuse of derivatives played a significant role in the 2008 crisis. And despite reforms, many believe that the derivatives market still lacks sufficient transparency and regulation. The role of regulation in our financial system is a delicate balancing act. On one hand, regulation is necessary to ensure stability and protect consumers. On the other hand, excessive regulation can stifle innovation and competition. Striking the right balance is a complex task that requires ongoing evaluation and adjustment. It's also worth considering the issue of financial institutions that are too big to fail. These are institutions that are so large and interconnected that their failure could cause significant disruption to the global financial system. The 2008 crisis demonstrated the dangers of allowing these institutions to operate without sufficient oversight. However, despite efforts to address this issue, many believe that it remains a significant risk. The question remains, are these institutions still too big to fail? Or have we learned our lesson and put in place sufficient safeguards to prevent a repeat of 2008? And if they are still too big to fail, what can we do to address this risk? The answers to these questions are not straightforward. They require us to critically examine our financial system, consider a range of perspectives, and continually adapt our approach in response to new challenges and opportunities. Preventing the next crisis requires us to learn from the past, stay vigilant, and adapt to the changing financial landscape. Let's remember that complacency is our enemy. We must stay alert, question our assumptions, and constantly strive for a more stable and equitable financial system. The lessons of the 2008 financial crisis are a stark reminder of the importance of this task. The 2008 financial crisis was a wake-up call for the world. It was a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of our global economy, how the tremors in one sector can send shockwaves across continents, disrupting lives and livelihoods. We've walked you through the fallout of this crisis, the government's response, and the lingering effects that still shadow our world. We saw how the Great Recession wasn't just an abstract economic event. It was a human tragedy with job losses, foreclosures, and businesses shuttered. It spread like a contagion, shaking the foundations of economies worldwide and exposing the frailties of those already on shaky ground, like Greece and Portugal. In the face of this turmoil, governments worldwide reacted with interventions and regulatory reforms. The United States introduced the Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP, a controversial bailout initiative aiming to stabilize the economy. The Dodd-Frank Act followed, a sweeping financial reform aimed at preventing a repeat of the crisis. And through it all, the Federal Reserve flexed its monetary muscle, utilizing quantitative easing to help steady the economic ship. But the long shadow of the crisis is still with us. It has exacerbated income inequality, with the gap between the rich and poor widening further. The housing market still bears the scars, with home ownership a distant dream for many. The crisis also fueled populism, creating a deep-seated distrust in the government and financial elites. On the global stage, the crisis precipitated shifts in economic power, with emerging economies gaining ground. It prompted debates on the effectiveness of regulatory reforms, highlighted the potential risks that still lurk in the shadows, and reignited the debate on the role of regulation versus innovation. In the end, this crisis taught us that complacency is our greatest enemy. It reminded us of the importance of vigilance and regulation in protecting our economies and livelihoods. The question now is, are we heeding the lessons of the past, or are we setting ourselves up for another financial catastrophe? It's a question that demands our attention, our scrutiny, and most importantly, our action.